Color BC here, Betty Catherine, but both of their children have done a lot of good work here at this museum, and we're just so happy they're involved here. Tyler is a graduate of UT, and he teaches history or social studies in Lenore City, and he has just written a book. And I want to be sure and invite you all, and Tyler will be telling you a little bit more about that, but invite you to come here to the museum for the launch of that book. And the date is August the 15th, and the signing will be at 5:30. So please put that in your calendar and join us, because we're so excited that he's chosen the museum to have his book launch and signing here. So I will not take up any more time, because you're not here to hear me, you're here to hear Tyler. And Tyler, we just thank you for coming today.
Thank you. Okay, I just set a timer for myself. Those of you who know me, I can go on and on, so, okay. Well, thank you to the Living Heritage Museum and the McMinn County Bicentennial for inviting me to give this History for Lunch talk. It means a lot, and can you guys hear me okay? Good, okay. Well, I'm one of those few individuals who is blessed to be a relative of Harry T. Byrne, McMinn County's most famous resident, and I always like to say, at this time 3 years ago, I knew about as much as you guys did. And then I started researching and realized there's a whole lot more to the story that was all just spread out and all sorts of resources all over this state, and not just about suffrage, but about his entire life, and I'm glad I was able to chronicle it. So I'll get this going here. Okay. Harry T. Byrne, known for casting the deciding vote to ratify the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which enfranchised millions of American women. The numbers on that keep conflicting, like a lot of things. In historical research, you find things that contradict other things, but anywhere from 17 to 27 million women were enfranchised by his vote, and of course you have eligible voters, and some women couldn't vote because of the poll tax, especially women of color, things like that. But nonetheless, millions of American women were able to vote because of this one vote. Known for being the youngest member of the General Assembly, he was 24, going on 25, and Governor Albert Roberts gave him a nickname, Baby Byrne, because he was the youngest member of the Assembly. And the average age of the legislators in that session was 60. And he was sitting next to a man from Irwin, I believe that's in Unicoi County, who was in his late 60s. And the oldest man in the legislature was a man, I want to say Gilbraith from Meigs County, who was in his 70s, a Civil War veteran from our neighbor Meigs County. So quite a generation gap there for him to be sitting next to Civil War veterans in 1920. And also, the public knows about him is that his mother, Feb Byrne, sent him a letter asking him to vote for suffrage. Now I'm going to get to the apocryphal stories, which was part of the inspiration for writing this book. Okay, so I begrudge no one, especially no one outside of this county and out of East Tennessee, for repeating these apocryphal stories, because as time goes on, reputable sources, newspapers print these things and they don't know better, so I don't begrudge them. But over the years, it's been said he was against suffrage. Not only that, he was voting no on the actual bill, and they didn't stop to think, well, how could he vote no and there's multiple votes? It's a very complex story, but he was not voting no on the actual amendment. He was voting to table the amendment. Table just means to put it off. And what I always like to do at every talk now is just give you a demonstration of what any politicians like to do. And of course, although a great statesman he wasn't perfect, he was also a politician. Here's what they like to do when it comes to controversial issues. They like to just wait until this election in November 1920 is over. Maybe we can take a vote on it in January of 21, and then by November 22, the masses will have forgotten what we did, we can get reelected. That's all they care about. So that's part of why he's voting to table and why there's actually votes to table. And then there's another myth that his mother admonished him to vote for the bill. I've seen stories printed about how she said, don't bother coming home if you vote no. And of course, I shouldn't even mention Facebook, it's not the real world, but you have comments on Facebook, people say, oh, his mother said she disowned him, and all sorts of things like that, and but that's all not true, and so I'm going to clear that up. And then another one, which is a lot more interesting, a lot more fun, that part of me wishes was true because it just makes for great drama and it'd be great for a movie, but there's the apocryphal story that he was chased by an angry mob of anti-suffragists after the vote. Now, there was a chase. He did not fear for his life, and he wasn't running from anti-suffragists. It's a very intricate, complicated story, which I'll be glad to discuss in a few minutes. So, these two reasons right here are part of why I wanted to write this book, especially for the anniversary coming up, to make sure it's all correct. And to have a single source for the historical record, because it's good to have things in one place rather than having it just strewn about everywhere. Okay, now, I'll explain the familial connection for those of you that don't know. These are Harry T. Byrne's parents, James Lafayette Byrne, also known as J.L. Byrne or Jim Byrne, co-founder of Crescent Hosiery Mill, first vice president, co-founder of the Bank of Nauta, first president, with Hugh Mock Wilson, and I should mention Hugh Mock Wilson was the first president of Crescent Hosiery Mills. And he came from a family of Republicans, and two of his uncles died in the Civil War fighting for the Union. So in 1894, he marries a young lady from a family, to quote my late cousin, Harry T. Byrne, of unreconstructed Democrats. Sounds terrifying. So, but they get married, and you know her father is a disabled Confederate veteran, Tom Insminger. He almost died at Missionary Ridge in 1863. And of course, had he died, you know, us three wouldn't be here. But so they get married in 1894. They have 4 children. The first is Harry T. Byrne, born 1895. The second is where our connection comes in. James Lane Byrne, nicknamed Jack, just like John F. Kennedy. All these people have these given names, and then their nickname makes no sense. But Jack Byrne, born 1897, was my mother, Sandra Boyd's grandfather, my great-grandfather. So all of Harry T. Byrne's, well, his closest relatives all descend from his brother, Jack, and there are 14 of us. So the only descendants of these two are the 14. And me and my mother and my sister Betty Catherine are here, and I'm so glad they're here. Now, they had 2 other children, Sarah Margaret Byrne, who passed away at age 11 in 1914 before the vote, and then Otha Virginia Byrne, who married Ray Hammer of Hammer Johnson Supply, could not have children, and she lived on Woodard Avenue, and close family, lived a charmed life. Sarah passes away in 1914, and then 1916, a week after turning 50, Jim Byrne contracts typhoid fever and is dead before the end of the month. Harry becomes the man of the house, but I like to specify that doesn't mean he's in charge. It doesn't mean he doesn't respect and listen to his mother. It doesn't mean that he's, you know, the family's true leader. That's still Feb Byrne. So we'll move on to the home. Now, we have the owner of Hathburn here, so glad Richard Rutledge is here. This is how Hathburn looked before the remodel. It was remodeled in the 1950s. It has the tall columns, but this home was built in 1849. The bricks were fired by slaves in the front yard. Now in 1914, Jim Byrne buys this home with a loan, courtesy of Hugh Mock Wilson to Bank of Nauta. It's supposed to be a temporary move because they want to move out of their home on Main Street, which is where the First Baptist Church in Nauta Fellowship Hall is now. They wanted to go somewhere that wouldn't remind them of Sarah because it was a place of sadness, and they ended up staying here. So Feb Byrne wrote the letter to Harry on that porch right there in her little chair. I found an interview with a Philadelphia, Pennsylvania newspaper where she said she wrote the letter on that porch. Now we don't know where the chair is, so it may be somewhere, we just don't know. That's the chair. Okay, we'll get on to Harry's career here, then we'll get on to the vote for suffrage. Now, 1918, he's 22, going on 23. Decides to throw his hat in the ring for the open seat for McMinn County's state representative seat, now held by Mark Cochran, which includes South Monroe County and Tellico Plains, but not the northern part of Monroe County. So he runs the primary in August 1918 against a Civil War veteran from Riceville named Lowry. I was walking with my Uncle Rudy in Riceville last year, and it's the old part of the Riceville Cemetery. If you're on that road and you have the highway over here, and then back that way, there are some homes. It's an obelisk. It's pretty old because he died in the 1920s. I just found it. I was like, well, this is the guy that this poor Union veteran wants to serve his country, and this little Harry T. Byrne defeats him for state representative. And so he wins this by about 500 votes, and then he goes on to the general election. Now, I apologize for the quality of this photograph, but this is actually a poster that my late cousin Harry had donated to the McMinn collection in Knoxville. Now, this photograph looks a lot better if you've seen it on the internet. This is probably the most circulated picture of Harry T. Byrne on the internet. So this is when he first ran in the general election in November 1918, 101 years ago. He's elected, I believe, by 700 votes against Colonel D.B. Todd of Etowah, a name who some people might recognize. Okay, now, this is something I discovered between the time I submitted my original manuscript and the time that I signed the Pastor Press form, which is just a few days ago. So we have to mention someone who I didn't even know existed until I had read Over Here and After by Bill Akins and Genevieve Wygans. Herschel Candler of Athens, one of the most important characters in this whole story, and as Patsy Ducksworth can tell you, tried to make this character sympathetic. I just can't. That's not possible. So, Senator Candler, from North Carolina, so not an Athens native, moves here in 1901 after graduating law school, makes his life here. He runs for mayor of Athens. He's vice mayor for a while. He's in the National Guard, colonel, Tennessee Bar Association, all the secret societies, Elks. Very involved man, very powerful, influential, respected. Well, he runs for mayor in 1919. So women are voting this year. They're voting in 1919. How? Well, during the 1919 session, Harry's first session, I believe it was in February or March, they passed a limited suffrage bill. Now, what this bill did was it gave women in Tennessee the ability to vote for president and vote for city elections. Now, due to some sort of regulation in the state constitution, they're not able to give them the vote for state government and things like that, and Congress, U.S. Senate, but they can vote for city and president. So, July 1919, the outgoing mayor is Mr. John W. Bayless, the grandfather of the late Reba Bayless Boyer. Herschel Candler is running for mayor. Now, he's doing this while he's in the Senate. That's not uncommon, but if you're called away for a session in Nashville, who's going to run the city? But he's running for mayor in July 1919, and he runs for mayor against a man named Ralph Knight. So remember that name. Now, is Tyler Forrest here? Okay, he may be here later. I have to mention that name to him because we were talking about it earlier. So remember the name Ralph Knight. Now, in this election, you'll see, there's a glare here, but you'll see that Candler loses to Knight by 27 votes. That's because in this election, 49 McMinn County, Athens really, obviously, Athens women voted for the first time ever. So the first women to ever vote in this entire county in the history of anything was Athens mayor in 1919. And there were 49 women that voted, just 49. And they had them vote, put their ballots in a separate box, and after it was done, the election commissioners opened up the box and looked at who voted for who, which is just ridiculous. But so the Chattanooga newspaper, I really like this from the Chattanooga News. They said that the women, they didn't want to sound condescending, but they have to make their point, which is ridiculous. But the women behaved themselves. It's sad they even had to say that. But this right here shows you how close this vote was. So Candler loses because 49 women are voting, and this is before his infamous speech, for those of you that have heard of his speech. So I was glad to discover that. Remember Ralph Knight and John W. Bayless. Okay, now we'll get on to suffrage. So the 1919 Tennessee General Assembly adjourns in April 1919, and everything is normal. They're thinking, we'll be back here in 1921. Well, June 4th, 1919, which coincidentally was the very day that Hillary Clinton's mother was born, The United States Congress proposes the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Now, that doesn't mean it's law, it just means it's proposed to the states. And that's one thing I love about our country, is that the state governments play a substantial role in amending the power of the federal government, because if you have the federal government amending its own power, it's an obvious conflict of interest and it's going to grow. So, June 1919, the amendments proposed. Leading the way are Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Then a lot of other states out west follow, and as you'll see, this map is actually what states did on their own. So I should back up a minute, forgive me. The states out west enfranchised their women on their own in the late 1800s. If you see a state with dots, it means there's partial suffrage. Maybe they can vote for mayor, they can vote for president. They can vote in a primary, and if it's solid black, there's no votes. So the actual amendments proposed in 1919, and the Midwest and the West lead the way. Texas is the first southern state to ratify, and of course Texas is kind of southern, but it's its own thing, you know. And South Carolina, Mississippi, and I believe, I want to say Virginia. Yeah, Virginia, they all reject it pretty early. And then later on, Alabama and Georgia say no. Upper South states of Kentucky, they vote yes. Missouri, sort of South and Midwest, they vote yes. So do Arkansas. So in, let's see, March 1920, Washington State, way over there, votes, they're the 35th state. So we have 48 states at the time. You have to have three-quarters of all the states to make this amendment law. So Washington's number 35, and the suffragists think they're really close. And then it just completely stalls. So just take a look at this map here real quick and think about what other states other than Tennessee maybe they could rely on. Because there's not many. So, March, Washington ratifies. And then in June, terrific pressure, to quote Harry T. Byrne, is brought upon Governor Albert Roberts of Tennessee to call a special session. It's the only way already adjourned legislatures can be brought back into session is if their governor orders them back to do business for whatever reason. So there's a lot of pressure on him. And after he gets a telegram from President Woodrow Wilson, the party leader, he says, I will call one. He doesn't actually call one. So this is in June. And in June, Delaware rejects this amendment. Now Delaware, you know, mid-Atlantic state, you think they'd be supportive of suffrage, but they weren't. They rejected it. So now the suffragists are thinking, well, we really have about 3 left because Florida's refusing to call a session. Connecticut and I believe Rhode Island, no, not Rhode Island, Connecticut and Vermont are refusing to, Connecticut and Vermont are refusing to call a session, so they can't act till at least January. Time is of the essence here. They're thinking, well, we can have Tennessee, North Carolina, or Louisiana. Now, is Louisiana going to ratify this thing? No. So it's going to be Tennessee or North Carolina. So by August of 1920, Governor Roberts finally calls a special session, and all the legislators have to return to Nashville. Excuse me. Now, there's 99 members of the General Assembly in the House, and there's 33 state senators. Now, when this session reconvenes in August 1920, there are 3 new legislators. Now, one of these legislators is a man named Jacob Simpson. Now, those of you that know Dennis Stewart, that is actually one of his great-granduncles, I believe. He replaced a man, this is from Bradley County, by the way, the Bradley and Polk County representative, they were conjoined. Simpson had replaced a man also named Jacob Smith, who was the great-great-grandfather of my best friend, Jeffrey Summers Smith. Those of you that knew his grandfather, Paul Marshall Smith, that would be his grandfather. So, unfortunately, his great-great-grandfather missed out on being part of this session. But I'll mention him in the book, though. I wanted to throw that in there. So, so this session meets, and it's Tennessee and North Carolina. There's an election for president in 1920. The first election since the end of World War I. A lot of women had filled in for their husbands during World War I. They had made the war victory possible, and they wanted to ride that momentum, and if they didn't get it by then, there's no telling what would have happened. Time was of the essence for November 1920 elections. Okay, the session begins. Harry T. Byrne says, at least 150 lobbyists from out of state come to Nashville to, I like what he said, to agitate one way or the other or to persuade. So yeah, I prefer persuasion myself. So now, state capitol in Nashville, I've got some great photos of the escape story I'm going to show you later. So Harry's staying at the Tulane Hotel, which is no longer there. He's being accosted by pro-suffrage lobbyists, anti-suffrage lobbyists. How are you going to vote? What are you going to do? And he gets tired of it, and he eventually checks out of the hotel and goes to stay with the executive secretary of Governor Albert Roberts, named Major Daughtry. Now, I should mention that when Harry left home, he had planned on voting for suffrage, and his mother, asked him to do that then. I hope you vote for suffrage, and he planned on it. But he gets there, and then the telegrams start coming in. Now, these are all from the Calvin M. McClung Historical Collection in Knoxville. All of Harry T. Burns' personal papers were donated by my cousin Harry T. Byrne at the request of his mother, my Aunt Ellen. Now, let's see, I gotta get past the glare here. Which one is this? Okay, I like this. All right, B.J. Hornsby. Another name you gotta remember is B.J. Hornsby, okay? The last sentence there, a vote for it will defeat you in spite of hell. So, the first line, over 90% of your friends are opposed to this. Now, this is garbage. These telegrams are by no means a scientific sampling of the vote of McMinn County, but it's all we have because there are no newspaper recordings from 1920 in McMinn, except for a few clippings here and there, and no polls were taken that were scientific. So my speculation, to borrow some words from Bill Aikens, Kenneth Langley, McMinn County was torn apart on this issue. I believe that McMinn County was just a little bit against suffrage, not much. Just like they were just a little bit in favor of the Union. But, like, if I recall, there were about 1,000 votes to remain in the Union, 800 to leave. Pretty close. So, but they're telling Harry, oh, they're overwhelmingly against it. And the judge, Sam Brown, also tells him, everyone's here is riled up. I've actually closed the court, and we had a meeting at the courthouse, and everyone's riled up, and you need to vote to table this thing, put it off till later. So the pressure is really caving in. And also, he got phone calls from both people running for president. Now, it doesn't mean that he was special and before this vote. Just they called everybody. They called all the legislators. Future President Warren G. Harding called him, and so did the Democratic candidate James Cox, asking him to vote for ratification. He got letters from Wilson's Attorney General, from the chairman of the RNC, all sorts of letters that are in his personal papers, asking him to vote yes. So there's pressure coming from all sorts of different ways. Okay, I believe it will be a great help to you. So I did a count on these telegrams. Now, of course, these are by no means a scientific poll representative sample of McMinn County, but a majority of the telegrams that are in his papers are pro-suffrage. But I still think that the county was really split down the middle with just an edge against suffrage, which I think his re-election campaign is proof of that. Okay. Here we're back to John W. Bayless. Does he say stand firm here? Is that right? Yes. Okay, yeah. Stand firm for the suffrage amendment. It must not fail. Okay, so I love this guy. John W. Bayless, for those of you that don't know, he ran Bayless Hardware, which is now the courthouse annex at the corner of Jackson and South Jackson and Madison. And he worked with Ralph Knight. Tyler, I was mistaken. Ralph Knight, he wasn't related to Colonel McKnight from Mahala the Daughter. I was a different person, so. Okay, and here he is again, Ralph Knight. Please vote for suffrage. So this is the man who had defeated Candler for mayor and a business partner of John W. Bayless. Okay, so this session, there's a lot of delaying tactics from August 9th when it starts all the way until Friday the 13th. Of course, it's a cliche, but bad luck. Well, this was bad luck for the anti-suffragists. So Senator Herschel Candler of Athens makes a speech in front of the state Senate, in front of all of his 32 colleagues, before they have their votes. They're explaining their votes. It passes pretty easily, but he gets up there and he gives a speech that would be considered tame today, sadly, but at the time, a very racist and sexist speech, a lot of vitriol, spewed at the suffragists in the gallery and at Carrie Chapman Catt, who was the heir to Susan B. Anthony. He had no shame. He went on and on for several minutes. Women were hissing him, and the Speaker of the Senate had to call everything back into order. And he had just absolutely no shame about this, and he didn't care. He was in the minority on it. So this speech is recorded by all the papers, and I had to. There's not really a transcript of this thing. At the Tennessee State Library and Archives, I couldn't find it. I had to take the Nashville papers, Chattanooga, Knoxville, and just sort of put it all together. And his speech, in the end, was a good thing, because it proved to be an inspiration to Fed Byrne. Okay, so she subscribes to, in addition to the Athens papers, the Athens Post and the Athenian, I believe, she subscribes to the pro-suffrage papers, Chattanooga News, Nashville Tennessean, now the Tennessean, and the Knoxville Sentinel. She reads this speech over the weekend because it's in the Friday evening, well, actually the Saturday morning probably for her, Saturday morning paper on Saturday morning, August 14th. She reads this, and that's when she sits down in that little chair on the front porch of Hathburn and pens this letter in pencil. Now, according to my cousin Harry T. Byrne and my late great-uncle James Lane Edwin Byrne, she was a stickler for grammar, stickler for etiquette, for formalities. She was embarrassed to have written this in pencil, but she had no ink. So after she wrote this in pencil, it's 7 pages long, and you guys have a handout, I believe. Forgive me, I meant to put page 6 on the second one instead of page 7. It's about 6.5 pages. She gives it to her other son, Jack Byrne. So yeah, that's where I mentioned how she writes the letter on the front porch of Hathburn in her little chair. And Candler's speech didn't persuade his colleague, because it passes overwhelmingly in the Tennessee Senate, 25-4. I don't know where the other 4 were, but this inspired her. I didn't know about this, so I started doing this research. And if anybody wants to go thank him for his stupid yet inspiring speech, go to his grave in Cedar Grove, just up from Glendale and then up Hill Street. It's right up there behind Food City, so go thank him for his speech. Okay, now here's the letter in Knoxville. They had it on display last year. It's the paper on the bottom right hand is kind of turned like this. If you turn that over, there's a little bit on the back. It's about 6.5 pages. And I was given access to this by Steve Cottom. He's a manager in the McClung Collection and the Knox County Historian. He was a graduate school friend of my late cousin Harry T. Byrne, and he said, you can look anything you like, so I got to get good pictures of this and hold it in my hand, and it's in pretty good shape for being 99 years old. And by the way, I should mention, Harry T. Byrne bequeathed this letter to his son and hinted that he should burn it. And I believe that's because his mother Feb, was so embarrassed that this letter was so informal in pencil and it had all this folksy chit-chat. But because of all the stories out there that I'm going to talk about later, that the letter wasn't real, that it was fake, that it never happened, they wanted proof that it actually took place. So that's why the family decided to keep it. And then my cousin Harry T. Byrne donated this to the McClung Collection after his father passed. Okay, I'm surprised I'm doing well on time here. So now, before I get here into this letter, I mentioned the telegrams. Now, there's other pressure being brought to Harry T. Byrne before he gets this letter. So the telegrams are lying to him saying McMinn's overwhelmingly against suffrage. The judge says you need to put this thing off. Both candidates running for U.S. president say vote yes. And even the former U.S. Senator from Tennessee, Newell Sanders, he actually called Harry when he found out they needed one more vote. He called him and asked him to vote yes. And that's thanks to the efforts of then Tennessee Senator Kenneth McKellar, who preceded Albert Gore Sr. in the U.S. Senate for Tennessee. So his role needs to be emphasized. But there's a letter that Harry T. Byrne received from a powerful Tennessee politician in the Republican Party, don't know who it was, that said, more or less, if you vote for this thing, your career is going to be over. So it's really party leaders that are pressuring to vote no from this county. It's the Republican Party leaders are pressuring to vote no, but the rank and file, they're for it. So this is all very complex. And during the session, no one knew, this wasn't public information until many years later, but I found out in my research, during the session, he spoke with two suffragists in the presence of a notary publics, and he said that, I plan to vote for this to honor the wishes of my constituents, well, to represent the wishes of my constituents. However, if it needs my help in honor of my mother, I will vote yes. So there's some calculation there. I mean, he knew he might get a chance to do something, and I know he was definitely an opportunist, which is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, Winston Churchill, one of history's great opportunists, not perfect, but on the whole, good, more than bad. So he's an opportunist on this, and he had told them behind closed doors. There was another conversation he had with some suffragists. He said, I can't pledge myself, but I'll do nothing to hurt you. So these suffragists, they have the people that definitely know, like Candler, and they have the people that are definitely going to be voting yes, like Joe Hanover, who's from Memphis. He's the Memphis leader of the Memphis delegation in the House. But Harry's uncommitted. And I'm going to talk about how Feb noticed this in her letter here before I dismiss for an intermission. So all sorts of pressure on him, and the timing on this is just absolutely crazy. So if you look at your handout, in case you can't see it from up here, this is from page 2 and page 6. You'll see the famous line on the first one, hurrah and vote for suffrage, and don't keep them in doubt. Now, I don't know if the papers they might have had a list of who's committed yes or no, but a lot of people that were definitely for it, they were going to have their names in there, and she hadn't seen anything. So she wanted to write to him to make sure he took a stand. And it's not even necessarily a stand one way or the other, it's just to take a stand altogether. Now, there are people out there in this world today who still try to just remain non-committed to something or try to remain ambivalent, trying to ride out controversy, and that's short-term thinking. It doesn't help you in the long term. So he's thinking, I'll take her advice and take a stand on this, and I may get vicious condemnation and slander and maybe an end of my career in the short term. In the long term, I'll be rewarded. And then she says, I noticed Chandler's speech. It was very bitter. Now, she wrote that as Chandler, and I later found out it was Candler, and kind of like candle. Now, let's see where we are here. Now, she mentions, I don't have this up here, she mentions one line, one of my favorite lines from the letter is, I hope you're in the notions of not making the race this fall. So even though he had been renominated in August, early August, she's thinking, you don't have to run for House again. Surely you can see that being a politician isn't all it's cracked up to be. What say ye? So I liked finding out that she wasn't really, that enthusiastic about her son being a career politician. I mean, he was a politician, as you'll see in my book, for many years, but not in the same office, forever, one of those types. He moved around, did a lot of different things, and didn't make a career out of it. He had a career on the side. He was a part-time legislator, like he was supposed to be in Tennessee. So I was glad to find that line. And also for the record, Feb Burns, she was not a political activist, didn't go to any meetings or organizations, but she had strong beliefs that she did not have any hesitation in sharing when asked or when certain subjects came up. So now this letter, I need to go intermission here. This letter was put in this envelope, and she gave it to her other son, Jack Byrne, my mom's Sandra Boyd's grandfather, who she never knew, because he passed in 1955. And my best friend, Summer Smith's grandfather, Bill Clark, knew him as a young boy in Iota in the 1940s. They'd go fishing in Mouse Creek. But he wrote this envelope. He addressed it in ink. She said, Jack, I want you to take this to the Iota post office. I want you to address this in ink. So he addresses this, and they don't do this anymore. Just a state representative, part-time, terrible pay, but honorable H.T. Byrne. So they don't do it anymore. And you'll see that in Nashville, so she mails this, or Jack mails this out the morning of August 16th, Monday. Early morning, August 17th, Tuesday, you'll see a Nashville post office has stamped this. And the stamp with George Washington, 2 cents. So while this letter makes its way from the foothills of Appalachia over the Cumberland Plateau to the state capital in Nashville, back in the day, you just put down someone's name and their city and it goes right to them. We will let this letter make its way to Nashville while we take a brief intermission. Thank you. friend's house, and I didn't have the street number. I told them it's Holt Street, it's the end of the street, you can't miss it. I described the house, no, we got to have a number. So back in the day, though, you could just put their name and their city, and it goes right to them. So now, in an interview, I'm gonna play audio later. Thankfully, my grandfather Bill Burns' older brother, who I never met, you may have known him as Jamie, Jimmy. If you knew him at DACA, you may have known him as Fester. He had a lot of names, but James Lane Edwin Byrne, the greatest historian we've ever had, perhaps. I've heard some people say that. I won't say who, but he recorded his uncle Harry T. Byrne in 1968 at Halfburn and Iota, and he told about how this letter was delivered. He said, "This was not delivered to me at my room at the Tulane Hotel. If it was, I wouldn't have got it. I wasn't there. It was delivered to him by a house page on the steps of the Capitol on the morning of August 18th. So Fed Burns' timing here is like lightning in a bottle. This is very fortunate. The stars aligned. Okay, House Speaker Seth Walker, first termer, late 20s, also pretty young. Just a complete stooge for the party leaders, and which is interesting because Governor Roberts, despite his hesitation to call a session, once the session got started, I got to give Roberts credit. Roberts really pushed for this thing, and he thought that Speaker Walker would be an ally, but he was not. He had voted for the limited suffrage bill, but he just became a turncoat. It may have been lobbyist influence. There's no telling what it was, and he only served one term in the House, and he went on to become the law partner of John J. Hooker, Sr., John J. Hooker Jr., of course, ran for governor many times and lost. But Speaker Walker is thinking, well, we're going to have a vote now. We're going to have a vote to table this thing. So everyone can go home, Democrats and Republicans can go home and not actually have this on their record. And we can get reelected and come back here in January and do whatever we want. And by November of 1922, the masses will have forgotten. A vote to table. There's 3 members absent. I forget why. One of them, I think, was ill. Another one had a family emergency, and another guy did too, and thankfully he stayed. I'll tell you about him in a minute. But a vote to table. 48-48. Harry T. Byrne votes aye to table. Well, they have another vote. He votes to table again. Now, I need to mention 2 gentlemen here that don't get enough credit. Banks Turner, a representative from Gibson County in West Tennessee, had previously been pledged to vote no. Well, when these votes to table came up, he voted no to table and kept this resolution alive both times. And even during the second roll call, Speaker Walker came over to him and put his arm around him at his desk. How are you going to vote? Just trying to intimidate him. And Banks Turner said, no, I'm voting yes. Or no to table, meaning I'm for this amendment. So they have, Walker's thinking, well, I can kill this thing right here, right now. You know, I'm tired of all this stuff. So I'm tired of these ties. We're just going to kill this amendment right here, right now. So we're going to have a vote on the merits of the resolution, which is a straight up, down, aye, no vote. If it doesn't pass here, it doesn't pass in the country, because the day before this, on Tuesday the 17th of August, North Carolina has said no. They rejected the amendment. I already said Louisiana rejected it. Florida wouldn't act. Connecticut and Vermont, their governors wouldn't let them come back into session. So Tennessee says no here. This thing's dead till at least the spring, and by then the election's over and the momentum is really stalling, and Tennessee wouldn't have gotten the credit, which would be a shame for us Tennesseans. So on this vote, they go in alphabetical order. There are 6 people, one of them Boyd, no relation to me and my dad. I've traced the Boyds back to Atlanta, Virginia in 1789. Don't know who his dad is, so we're at a dead end there. But the 7th vote is Harry T. Byrne. He votes aye. It's pretty quick. It's kind of quiet. And everyone's really excited. You know, they're sort of in disbelief. Did he say yes? He's been voting no, and he even has a red rose on. And they go over the rest of the entire House members by alphabetical order, including Banks Turner, votes yes. And there's another man who needs to get credit too, a man named T.A. Dodson of Kingsport in Sullivan County, which is one of the few Democratic strongholds in East Tennessee. He was told that his toddler at home was dying and he was going to get a train home. And Senator McKellar and I believe Senator Sanders, former Senator Sanders, both U.S. senators, arranged for the railroads to get him a special train home to see his child after the vote. They said, you can't leave. I know your child's dying. It must have been one of the worst decisions anyone could ever make, but we need your vote for this, or this is not going to change our country. So he decides to stay and votes yes, and then he goes home after that to see his child. And thankfully the child recovered. The child did not pass away. But Harry votes out to break the tie, and I'm sure Steve Collin wasn't the first person to say this, although I have heard him say, there's no better word to describe it, pandemonium in the House chamber. You had the gallery, up here, and just on the sides, and women are screaming and dancing and singing, and they're throwing down the banners of the National Women's Party colors, yellow and purple and white, and throwing yellow roses in the air, and it's just pandemonium. And then the anti-suffragists are really angry, and then people think this is when Harry T. Byrne was chased by an angry mob. And I just think about it in my head as how silly it looks. It almost sounds like a cartoon, just like the Tasmanian devil going around just messing everything up, but that's not what happened. So after this vote, Governor Roberts is scared for his safety because, after all, he put it over, and the anti-suffragists, a lot of them were pretty vicious. He calls in the National Guard just in case things get out of hand, and he tells, which they didn't, there's a little bit of stuff, not much. He tells the sergeant at arms, these middle-aged guys not in the best shape, protect Byrne. Well, my late cousin Harry T. Byrne wrote a form letter describing what happened, and he said, the thought of being under house arrest infuriated my father. And in the interview with James and Edwin Byrne in 1968, he said, I told these sergeant at arms, these guys, I won't leave if you quit hanging around me. You're being obnoxious. We are under governor's orders, sir. Well, I'm just going to leave then. So I'm Speaker Walker, and I should have mentioned Harry was in the third row over here. So this door outside here is the first of 4 offices on the right side. There's also 4 on this side. So that's the west side of the Capitol, and right out there is the old State Library, or the current, soon-to-be old State Library. So he goes in that office there and goes out a window. Now, I took multiple pictures for the book. If you want to see the rest of the pictures, you have to buy the book. So I took this. Dad and I traveled to Nashville last fall because I was fortunate to get former Speaker Beth Harwell to do my foreword. I met her last year when she came to run for governor and very graciously did that. And I emailed her staff and said, well, can I come take some pictures for my book? And they said, sure. So I thought I was going to get a picture of the window, which I did. But one of the clerks working there said, no one should, let's go outside. So we actually went out onto the portico, which you're not supposed to do. And I got this picture of the ledge he actually walked on. So pretend I'm at the window. There's not much of a ledge. And then there's the portico, which is pretty wide, probably like 40, 50 feet wide. And then just off of that, he goes on this ledge. So I got these pictures. That's facing north. Now, the last window on the right is the old State Library. It's a very large room, probably 30 feet high, and it has an iron staircase, and it's still there just to be preserved. And Harry went in there and went up to the top to hide in the attic. And of course, when he said hide, I think over the years people thought he meant he was scared. He wasn't scared. He was just trying to get away from the sergeant at arms, to be left alone. And he's wearing a dark colored suit and much less comfortable shoes than what I have on, with those actually had shoestrings and a tie and just 95-degree heat in August. And about 15 minutes later, he's like, I can't take it anymore. He leaves and he blends into the crowd, exits the Capitol on the south side, and he goes to the Hermitage, or he's going to go to the Hermitage Hotel. Well, then the sergeant at arms spot him again because they're looking for him from the balcony. They go down and they chase him. So there is a chase, but it's not much of a chase because, like I said, these are middle-aged guys out of shape, and Harry T. Byrne's skinny 24-year-old. He just runs right down to the Hermitage Hotel. I mean, not even half a mile. And goes into the Hermitage Hotel, blends into the crowd. He's smart. It's almost like he's a character in a chase movie, like Harrison Ford in The Fugitive or something. He's like, if I run, they'll know I'm the bad guy, or I'm the guy they're after. So he had just been prescribed glasses for reading, and he put those on, and he had a hat, which I found in a picture. He put the hat on, walked around normally, and they couldn't find him. Then he got into the car with an attorney from Knoxville who my cousin Harry T. Byrne suspected might have been his date for the day, but he doesn't know for sure. And they enjoyed the day together. They went to Shelby Park, which is in East Nashville, not far from the Hermitage area, the Andrew Jackson Hermitage. And that's what he did that day. So there was no chase, and he wanted to get away and enjoy the day and not be, get a Gatorade bath from the pro-suffragists or even be accosted by the anti-suffragists. He wanted to get away and enjoy the day, and I can't really blame him because it was absolute pandemonium. So that's what really happened, and over the years, the story just turned into this big mob chase, and it makes for great television or movies, I'm sure, but it didn't happen. Okay, my favorite telegram, which is the last line in my book. John W. Bayless, former mayor of Athens, grandfather of Reba Bayless Boyer, said, "Voting for suffrage enrolled your name among the immortals. Stand firm." So Mr. Bayless knew the impact of this, and he passed away a couple of years later. He was getting up there in age, and he had, I forget where this was. I read somewhere about how he had been a longtime supporter of suffrage, and he barely lived to see it pass. Okay, now, I got to give credit to Joe Hanover. Joe Hanover was the leader of the pro-suffrage delegation from Memphis. He defended Harry from these bribery accusations. So that evening, he's back at Governor Daughtry's house, the evening going into Thursday, August 19th, and they found out that the Nashville Banner, the anti-suffrage paper, is going to print a story about how he was bribed, given $10,000 in 1920 to vote for this bill, or to vote for the suffrage amendment. And so Luke Lay, I think it's Luke Lay or Luke Lee, he was a Tennessee senator and editor of the Tennessean. He calls the governor's secretary and says, "I need to talk to Byrne. Get him down here at the office. We're going to take a statement from him. We're the morning paper. We're going to get it in the paper before anyone else does." So he talks to them, and then the morning of August 19th, my mother's birthday, bold attempt to intimidate Salon foils. I think Salon is like an old-fashioned way of saying a legislator. Apparently, I learned that during my research. And try to coerce Byrne with charges of bribery. Joe Hanover defended him, and also the one small redeeming thing that Senator Candler has, Patsy, is the fact that he defended Harry from the bribery accusations. Despite Candler being viciously against women's suffrage and a big sexist, he said there's no way Harry would have taken the bribe. He's too honest of a guy, and he wasn't raised that way. And he even helped in Harry's re-election campaign. So he's able to do a little bit of redemption. So not much, though. Me and Patsy found out some stuff about Candler from early in his career, and it's not pretty. Even for the time, it's pretty bad. Okay, now a lot of these pictures are not in my book, and I did that for a reason, because they were rejected by my publisher, which for good reason. They're not good quality, and they wouldn't look good in black and white. But these were in the scrapbook. In addition to the Harry T. Byrne papers and the McClung collection in Knoxville, the Harry T. Byrne scrapbook, which should really be called the Fed Byrne scrapbook, at UT Library, Special Collections. Fed Byrne kept newspaper scrapbook of all the 1920 happenings, and I looked through that a couple years ago, and this one I found, the lady third from the left, the person third from the left, is pinning a badge onto Fed Byrne, and she just looks, so happy right there. For her service in helping women get the vote. Now this lady pinning a badge on her is Abby Crawford Milton. Her husband, George Milton, was the publisher of the pro-suffrage Chattanooga News. And she was a longtime suffragist from Tennessee, and she lived to be 110 years old. She died in 1991. She was 14 years older than Harry T. Byrne and died 14 years after him, so it's just crazy. But I wanted to show you guys this picture, because this was actually at the old courthouse in Athens in 1920. In September of 1920 is when this happened. And the lady on the far right of the picture is, I believe, Mrs. Moody. I forget her, back then it's just husband's name, Mrs. Husband's name. But Mrs. Moody, she was the chairman of the McMinn County League of Women Voters. Okay, now the re-election campaign. J.H. Jones, an Etowah Democrat, opposed Harry as an independent, thinking he could probably bring in some votes from both parties. During this campaign, like I already said, Senator Candler campaigned for him. he got a lot of letters, which I have in the book, saying, don't worry, you'll get reelected, this is going to blow over, you'll be fine. The loudest voices in the room are not always the representation of real life. I wish we knew that today, that the loudest voices in the room are not the representation of real life. Well, Chattanooga Times, the anti-suffrage paper, they hated Harry. I mean, it's just, they really hated what he did. They were probably the worst of the anti-suffrage papers, even worse than the Nashville Banner. And they printed all sorts of hit pieces on him, criticizing his lack of service in World War I. Now, whether or not your opinion, regardless of your opinion on the draft, there are other ways to serve your country in a war effort. You have to do work at home, whether you're, taking care of your family, just trying to get by, or you're helping make the weapons you need for war and doing things that boost morale. All sorts of things had to be done. And he was given an exemption by the Southern Railway because he was a longtime railway employee and he knew how to do Morse telegraphy. He ran the telegraph machines. This one man, they interviewed one of his bosses, and he said he's the only man who can do all the jobs on the railroad. Harry would work as far as Bristol and as far south as Dalton, Georgia, all along the East Tennessee line. So he was contributing to the war effort, although he wasn't a combat veteran. So they thought they could help get him voted out because of this, get all the World War I veterans and those families riled up. And so, like I said, the party leaders were pressuring him to vote no. And Mrs. Moody, who's in the picture I showed you before, the Democratic Party leaders in McMinn County told her, we're going to remove you from your position if you try to get Byrne reelected. And the Republicans were just as bad. They were also trying to get him voted out, but the rank and file were behind him. Now, according to my late cousin, Harry T. Byrne, Harry T. Byrne, the elder, he credits Mrs. Stubbs, who was a wife of a dean at Wesleyan in 1920, for saving his political career, because what she did, she got all sorts of women out to vote, to get registered to vote, and to go vote him back into office. Now, this re-election campaign was only covered by the Chattanooga papers because, unfortunately, very few Athens newspapers from 1920 survive. The ones that do survive are clippings, things like that. Thankfully, their efforts failed. One of the reasons why I think McMinn County was just a little bit against suffrage, just like they were just a little bit against leaving the Union into the Civil War, is the fact that he was reelected by 285 votes. And if you think about it, just a few hundred women getting to vote for the first time, that put him over the top. He won re-election by 285 votes. And I remember there's a clipping where the Athenian was celebrating his re-election and saying that, this is just a complete slap in the face to the Chattanooga Times, who thought they were just going to easily get him voted out. So that was great to see that. And let's see. Yes, campaign was bitter, borrowing a word from Fed Byrne. Candler's speech is very bitter. Okay, I got to thank Tyler Force for a lot of things, too many to count. But my cousin Harry T. Byrne had this paper in his home, and Tyler let me take a scan of it. This is from the McMinn County Election Commission. When Harry T. Byrne was reelected, they sent him a letter and said he got 2,387 votes. Now you think about a county with a population at the time of 25,000 people, and you didn't have any minorities voting because of the poll tax. Kids couldn't vote, and a lot of the poor couldn't vote because of the poll tax, and a lot of women didn't register to vote because a lot of them didn't want to vote at the time. So you pretty much just had the wealthier white men and a few hundred women voting. This is a very high turnout for the time, very high turnout. And you'll see one of the signatures down here in the middle is Mr. B.J. Hornsby, who told Harry, a vote for suffrage will defeat you in spite of hell. So he had to sign this paper to certify his re-election to the House from McMinn County. So, a small world, you got people, they're in one position, they're in another position, they're on election commission, they're in office, that's how it was back then. Okay, so I'll try to be brief when I discuss the rest of this, but I wanted this talk to be about him and the 19th Amendment, and I hope you've enjoyed that. But I'm going to mention a few things about the book here because I always thought that this was the only thing relevant in his life. And although it was his most impactful action, no doubt, it was the beginning of a remarkable career in public service. It really was. So I knew about as much as you guys did. If you guys ever read that marker in Nyota at the cemetery that's right by the red light at Wilson and Byrne, you knew these little tidbits. I knew that from the time I was in junior high. I didn't think much of it. But then I started digging into it. So didn't go to law school, passed the bar exam in 1923 from studying. I remember my cousin Jack Burns said that he always told him, I was ready to go to Cumberland University Law School in Lebanon, but I passed the bar exam. I was able to forego law school. Ran for governor in 1930 unsuccessfully, served in the state senate for 2 terms, president of the First National Bank in Rockwood, member of State Planning Commission. And one of the errors on that historical marker, he was actually a member of 4 conventions to change our state constitution, not 3. The 1971 convention is not on that marker, and my suspicion is that that marker was lifted from a 1970 interview for the golden anniversary of the amendment in 1970, and that hadn't happened yet, so they didn't update it by the time he passed in 1977. So I'll show you just a few quick pictures here. So this one, he runs for governor. At that time, he's a Sweetwater lawyer. I'm not going to tell you he was going to win. He wasn't. And even if he got the nomination, he probably wasn't going to win that either. Democrats were dominating the state at the time. But he lost to a Memphis machine candidate. We know how things were in Memphis back then with voting, you know. But it's an interesting chapter. And it shows you also, that chapter, his whole political philosophy. Now, there is a poster over here from this primary in 1950, and there's also a poster from the general election up in the women's suffrage exhibit that has this photograph from when he was a senator for, it's pretty much the district Mike Bill represents now, except throw in Meigs County. So, Southeast Tennessee. Okay, now, when I started doing research, I learned that most of the folks that knew Harry, they're still with us, and the list is shrinking, sadly, as it's been 42 years. Most of them are actually in Rockwood, because he spent a lot of time in Rockwood in the last third of his life, and of course he still came to Nyota on weekends and had a summer home there, but a lot of his daily life was in Rockwood, and the folks that knew him in Nyota have passed on. So I went to the old Roane County Courthouse. I spoke to their historian. He said, you talked to 3 people. One of them was a gentleman who passed away about a month ago named J. Polk Cooley of Rockwood. Now, I got to call him about in the fall of 2017, because he's 91. Okay, I'm going to call him tomorrow. So I called him. I told him who I was, what I was doing, and the first word out of his mouth after a few chuckles, he said, Harry favored the color green. Now, it's not just because that's the Rockwood Tigers colors. It's also because it's the color of money. He painted the bricks at the bank green. His stationery was light green with dark green ink. So the entire time he was bank president, he made everything green. So that was sort of putting his mark as bank president. And this bank, there's a Simmons Bank, Kentucky Street in Kingston, still has the green bricks. Now, the First National Bank in Rockwood, the headquarters, that's still there. That's no longer green. It's on Chamberlain Avenue. It still says First National Bank, it's Regions, but it says First National Bank, and they have his 2 slogans still on the plaques on either side. The Gateway Bank, the gateway to the Cumberlands, where you feel at home, that was his slogan. So that's still there. But the drive-through, which is behind the Rockwood Bank on Chamberlain. Yeah, the bank is on, the bank faces Rockwood Street. The drive-through is behind it on Chamberlain Avenue. This still has the green bricks. So I wanted to show you guys this, because my book won't have color pictures, unfortunately. So. And he was apparently a pretty good banker, so a lot of people told me that. He was very successful, and with his dad being a co-founder of the Bank of Nyota, and him having dabbled in banking in Sweetwater for a little while, he had some experience. He wanted to leave, well, not leave law. I mean, you can be a lawyer whenever you want to be, but he primarily became a banker after this point in his life and put law to the side. Now, when he was a delegate to 4 conventions to change our state constitution to improve and modernize our governing document, the first one was 1953. By this time, he's an elder statesman in the party, and notice, he's doing a couple of terms in the House, a couple of terms in the Senate, and he's moving on to other things, not being a seat warmer, for the gazillion terms. Well, in 1953, in the House chamber where the delegates met, he sat in the exact same desk he sat in 33 years earlier when he voted yes for the 19th Amendment. I thought that was nice of the delegates to let him sit there. And as you can see, this picture would be terrible in a black and white book. Okay, now this one I wanted to put in the book, but unfortunately this newspaper, the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle, is owned by USA Today Network, and they charge about $400 to use pictures. So I'll drop that out of it pretty quick, but I wanted to show it at all my talks. And in 1962, he visited the Susan B. Anthony house. And right there, whoever took this picture is a genius. He's holding the letter from his mother, Feb Byrne, and in the background is a portrait of the greatest suffragist of all time, Susan B. Anthony. So I should mention that his vote would not have been possible without the efforts of suffragists like Susan B. Anthony, because her best friend, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York, said, "All men and women are created equal, and we want the vote." And in 1872, Susan B. Anthony votes illegally in New York. She's fined. She refuses to pay the fine, but they wouldn't punish her for it because they did not want her to become a martyr. In 1891, Lyde Smith Merriweather founds the very first suffrage organization in Tennessee in Memphis. And then in the teens in the early 1900s, a lady named Lizzie Crozier French of Knoxville gives all sorts of speeches, including a speech to the Browning Circle here in Athens, inspiring women to promote the right to vote and to lobby for the right to vote and to make that idea more mainstream. And a Nashville suffragist, Ann Dallas Dudley, she lobbied hard to get the National Women's Suffrage Convention in Nashville for 1917, all leading up to Tennessee being the final state. And the only Tennessee suffragist ever jailed for her activism was from Jackson, Sue Shelton White. She was protesting in front of the White House to get Woodrow Wilson to support the amendment, which he finally did, which inspired Governor Roberts to call this session in Tennessee. Her and Alice Paul were taken to jail just for exercising the First Amendment rights. And then Carrie Chapman Catt, who Senator Candler viciously attacked in his letter, she led the entire lobbying effort during this session. So without their efforts, his vote wouldn't have been possible. So I'm glad he got to take a pilgrimage to Susan B. Anthony's home, because along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they were the beginning and he was the end. Okay, Governor Dunn, thankfully still with us. I reached out to him, see if he remembered Harry, and he didn't. But he's very kind, very gracious. I offered to let him read the manuscript, and he did. He liked it. And I sent him this picture that I found from a newspaper. It was some sort of like Governor Dunn talks old-time politics with these elderly legislators, and Harry was among them. And Harry's in his late 70s there. These gentlemen over here are probably in their 80s, and Governor Dunn is just a young 40-something. And he was giving Harry some sort of a Distinguished Tennessean Award. I mean, Harry probably had so many of those awards, he didn't know what to do with them at that point in his life. But he was still very involved in state politics, not in office, but still, involved in the Nashville political social life. And this is, Governor Dunn was actually the first Republican governor to be elected since 1920, so a 50-year span. So just to show you his longevity, it's just incredible. This is from the 1970s. Okay, Hathburn after renovation. So like I said, the photo I showed you earlier is the old porch where Fairburn wrote her letter. Well, in the 1950s, Hathburn was remodeled, giving the large columns right there, and other things were added on to. And of course, the color of this photograph, they couldn't have this in the, it's going to be in the book, but I just wish it could be in color, but I want to show you guys here how it looked in color, because black and white just doesn't do it justice. He had all sorts of parties and soirees here. Just about everyone I talked to that knew Harry, even if they didn't remember him much, oh yeah, I remember those Hathburn parties, they were great, so. Okay, and there's another view right there from the, so to this side is Farrell Street, I believe, on this side. And the driveway that comes straight out from the home goes to Farrell Street. And there used to be an entrance on Highway 11 to the left of the photo, and that's all grown up now, but there was a road there at one time. Okay, like I said, this vote started a lifetime in public service. And of course, he was a successful attorney, which I talk about some of his greatest moments as an attorney and as a banker. And his foresight was incredible, and not just political timing, being in the right place at the right time to vote on things, but just his foresight to stand up for good ideas long before their time would come, and to develop certain areas and to make certain reforms that were needed. You know, he did not shy away from that, and he caused even more controversy, and not a lot of things I know a lot of us wouldn't agree with, but he stood for what he believed in, and he wasn't scared of being a minority at all. And I know that some of the controversy he started, there's still people around whose family had butted heads with him, so it's no surprise with a combative person like he was. But when he was in Sweetwater, just to give you an example, he tried everything he could to just ban alcoholic beverages, to tax and to regulate them, and it didn't make the people in Sweetwater very happy. So he was definitely an old school prohibitionist type. So he would not have signed the petition in 2015 to sell wine in Athens, let's put it that way. Okay, so I learned in my research, Harry T. Byrne voted for not one, but 3 federal amendments to the U.S. Constitution, was an early advocate of lowering the voting age to 18, which he did live to see, helped draft election reform laws in the aftermath of election fraud, not just in this area, but also in Memphis and all over the state. And also, this stuff can get kind of dry. I tried the best I could to make it interesting, but for any of the political or history buffs in here, who's heard of the case Baker v. Carr? Anybody? Well, that case may not have actually happened had the legislature listened to Harry T. Byrne about reapportioning our legislature, because it hadn't been reapportioned in many years, and you had a very small rural county, and the representatives vote had the same vote as a representative from maybe Nashville with hundreds of thousands of people, and it wasn't equal. And he said, we got to address this, and they kept ignoring it, and then the Supreme Court rules on it, which is one of the landmark cases in our history, you know, all because they didn't listen to him. So I tried to describe that in the book. And just a reminder, the book should be at the presses anytime. I signed the final Pastor Press form a few days ago, so I'm done with all that crap, thankfully. But it should be at the presses anytime. It's going to be in stores August 5th, Barnes & Noble Books and Me, and across Tennessee. It's a statewide release, and various museums like this one and other little places. And ArcadiaPublishing.com will have it for sale, so will Amazon. But August 15th here at the museum, I'm very thankful that I've been invited to have a book launch here because I thought this would be the best place. So Thursday, August 15th at 5:30, we're going to have a reception and book signing. And cover art, thankfully, this publisher, I was recommended. My cousin on my father's side had recommended them, and Sheriff Guy had worked with them before. His hidden history books were all published by this publisher. They do great work, and they at least consult you. Like I found out about UT Press. They were interested. UT Press, I found out they don't consult you on the title or the cover, and the copyright's not in your name. And I said, no way, this is mine. So, and there's no ebook either. So Arcadia, you're consulted on the title, cover art, there's an ebook, copyright's in your name, and the back cover has a picture of Fed Byrne and the letter. Now I'm going to leave you with an audio footage of Harry T. Byrne being interviewed by James Lane Edwin Byrne in 1968, reflecting on his vote for suffrage. So I'm going to go on this side and then turn it on and then kind of come around and back to here. But the quality's pretty good, so you should be able to hear it. So the man on the left is James Lane Edwin Byrne, and the man on the right is Harry T. Byrne in his signature double-breasted suits. Now, Jamie's going to ask him a question, and then the rest of it is Harry talking. And unfortunately, he coughs one time, but other than that, it's pretty good quality. So, or I'll just end the slideshow, maybe. I'll do it back here.
What if you had to do it over? Would you do it again? Yeah. Sorry about that. I said at a speech in July 21 at Sycamore Park in Los Angeles addressing the Tennessee Society. At the time, I made the statement that I didn't think that votes for women would be the cure-all to improve the morals of politics as much as those who advocated said it would, and I didn't think it would ever prove to be the disaster that its opponents said. It certainly gave women their rights. Now you take your grandmother and my mother here. She was a student of international affairs. She's been a college woman, and she could vote intelligently. And yet she had illiterate or uneducated men working on this farm that could vote and go down to the polls here and put a big bond issue out on her property. Oh yeah. So I think it was morally right. I thought it then. I still think it.
So we thank our native son, Harry T. Byrne, for his vote to change this country. And I thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure, and I'll take any questions you may have. Thank you. There we go. Yes, Mayor Priest.
How does the yellow rose figure into this?
Thank you for asking. I should have mentioned that all the suffragists who were in favor of votes for women, men or women, all wore yellow roses on their clothes during the special session, and the people against it wore red roses. And Harry had on a red rose because he didn't want to make the party leaders who were against suffrage mad, but when he voted yes, he took the red rose off. So.
Tyler, do you care to speak to the story that is probably made up, it's now the folklore about Clem Jones, the railroad lobbyist, and the relationship to Harry Byrne?
What I know about Clem Jones are from telegrams. Alice Paul, you had Carrie Catman Shatt, who was the persuasive suffragist leader of the NAUSA, National American Woman Suffrage Association, and you had the militant suffragists, the ones who, to quote Fred Underdown, I wouldn't want to run into them in a dark alley. Very militant. But Feb said she liked those suffragists too. She liked them both. Alice Paul had a lot of suffragists working under her, under the National Women's Party. One of them was Anita Pulitzer, and she came to Athens to try to figure out what Candler and what Harry T. Byrne were going to do. And she found out about Clem Jones, about how he was a L&N Louisville, Nashville railroad lobbyist, of course, pretty much created Etta Wall in the early 1900s, and how he was against suffrage. And she told Alice Paul, we're going to run into some trouble in McMinn County because of Clem Jones and the railroad lobby being against suffrage. And I also know that in this interview, you just heard part of the interview, Harry stayed in the Hotel Tulane with Candler in the next room. They were on, I forget which floor, but Harry had a room, Candler had a room, and then there were two other rooms, and one of those rooms was occupied by, during the session, was occupied by Clem Jones and the L&N lobbyists. So they were against suffrage. So that's about all I know. So.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Great presentation.
Thank you.